Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. So today's video is, I'm just going to show you a quick technique, something off the back of a background that I made in a previous video, so I'll link that up in the corner. So we're going to be looking at heat embossing resist techniques. So this is where we're going to be stamping an image, we're going to white heat emboss it, and then we're going to do some inking over the top of it to create a really fun background. We'll do a little bit of watercolouring as well. So I just wanted to show you a few sort of different ways that you can sort of use this technique and create sort of different and interesting backgrounds for your cards and projects. So all I'm doing here, so I've got a stamp set which came free with Simply Cards and Papercraft. I think this was issue 204. And so I'm just going to create a really sort of simple single flower and leaf background pattern, and then we are going to be using some watercolour paints just to sort of create a watercolour background. So all I've done here is I've got my piece of cardstock, and this has gone into my Tonic stamping platform, because what I want to do is stamp it a couple of times to make sure that I am getting a really good crisp impression. So all I did to begin with is just use my anti-static powder tool, and that will make sure the embossing powder doesn't stick anywhere I don't want it to. And then I'm just inking up my stamps using my Emboss ink, sort of a clear sticky ink pad. Now you will notice when I've done this, you can see sort of just a little bit of a faded black outline of the image. So this is obviously where I haven't cleaned my stamp properly after my last use. But because we're going to be white heat embossing it and then sort of put some colour over the top of that again, you really can't see it, so it's not an issue at all. So all I've done here is I've stamped each of the images twice, so I'm just going to do this in sets of 2, and then I'm going to heat set it, because obviously we don't want to leave it so long where then our sticky ink is no longer sticking. So here I'm just using the Paper Mania. This is the Seafoam White embossing powder, and then all we're going to do is just heat set that with our heat tool. So like I said, I'm just going to do this sort of 2 at a time, and then that will sort of give us a really great background and sort of come together quite quickly. The one thing when you are melting your embossing powder, if you don't want your paper to warp, then I would recommend heating up your heat tool for a couple of seconds before you sort of pop it over your paper, and that should stop it warping. So what we're going to do is, once I've heat set this, I'm just going to go ahead and repeat the process, and that will create us a really nice full background, like I said, but I'm just sort of moving the images around my cardstock and in just sort of a random sort of pattern. So here's our finished background. So I'm just finishing off heat setting our embossing powder, and then we can go ahead and get started with the watercolours. So the sort of backgrounds in that I'm going to be showing you today might not look the prettiest, but again, I just wanted to show you sort of different ways that you can use this heat embossing resist technique, the kind of backgrounds that you can create and sort of the effects that it gives you. So here I've got my watercolour palette. I'm just going to create a really simple background using some blue and some green. So it does end up being sort of a lot darker than this, but obviously I just want to show you using some darker colours that the white can still kind of show up. So you can see here that the embossing, the sort of hardened embossing powder is now creating like a barrier for this watercolour, whatever it is that you're going to put on it. And the colour is just going to kind of bead around it. And what you can do is, if you're doing lighter colours like this, or sort of light layers like this, you can then just wipe off any sort of excess colour with a paper towel, and that will just sort of bring through that bright white embossing powder. Now with this particular background, I think I probably went a little bit far with it, so what I ended up creating was quite dark. So you can see here it is quite light, but because I kept sort of applying the colour, obviously it just got darker and darker. And you can't quite see that embossing powder, that bright white embossing powder, sort of as much as what I would have liked to, but I still think actually it created a really nice background. The embossing powder took on just a little bit of colour, and yeah, I think it sort of ended up still being okay. So if you want to still have that bright white, then I would recommend maybe not sort of putting such heavy layers on, but like you can see here, you've still got some white in some sections, but other sections, like I said, it has sort of taken on that watercolor colour a little bit more. But like I said, I really like how this background came out, and I can definitely see myself using it on a card just with a really simple sentiment. The one thing I would say, if you are heat setting, don't forget that you're heating up that embossing powder again. So I would, if you can, avoid let your projects dry naturally, because you don't want to sort of mess up your embossing powder at all. Like I said, because you are heating it back up again, but definitely don't put your finger in it or anything. So with this next one, I'm going to take, this is a rare earth background. So again, I'm not going to create anything, I guess, too pretty with this particular background. I just want to show you again, using different ink pads. So for this, I'll be using some dye ink. So these are my Prism Mold of Colour inks I'll be using. Just going to do some really simple inking behind it, because I want to show you that no matter what colours that you're going to use over the top of it, you can still get that really fantastic bright white embossing powder. So here you can see I've stamped my image. I'm just going in this time, this is the Sweet Dixie embossing powder, and this is the Glacier White, and this is ultra fine, because I wanted to make sure that I picked up everything on this sort of particular design. So like I said, here, these are my ink pads. I've just picked up some primary colours, and I'm really not doing anything particularly pretty or neat here, because I'm literally just going ink pad straight onto paper. Again, I just want to show you that you can ink over these. You can also use your blending tools and things, but I just want to show you what it looks like with each of sort of the primary colours. So again, ink straight on. So you will notice as we get into the darker colours, that ink sits again on top of that embossing powder. So you can see here what was white embossing powder has now taken on that orange ink. But I will show you that we can sort of bring it back to that really, really nice bright white. Again, here with the purple or the pink, again, it's taken on that colour. So you could leave it like that if you wanted to. And then that could be the kind of background you create. That could be the effect that you want. But again, this is heat embossing, this is resisting. So we've done it in the white because we want that really nice, bright white colour to shine through. So lastly, we've got the blue. So there wasn't much design left for this blue, but I sort of overlapped it a little bit with the green colour. So now I'm just going to take my microfiber cloth, and I'm just going to really carefully, because you don't want at this point to then be mixing your colours together or sort of, you know, ruining your background. So I'm just following the pattern that I've done, which is sort of horizontal. And all I'm doing is wiping or just sort of buffering the embossing powder. So you'll be able to see really clearly here with this sort of pink purple section. Just if you just wipe off that sort of ink that's sat on top of that embossing powder, you can bring back that really, really bright white embossing powder. And this is really, using inks, this is probably one of the best ways of doing this technique, because you can still get, like I said, that really nice white embossing powder effect, and it just cleans up so well. But I've noticed that I've gotten better results using a dye ink than what I have using something like a Distress Oxide ink. So the last sort of technique that I want to show you here, again, I've got another rare earth background. So we've got these bottles and all of these bubbles. And what I want to show you here is using the Distress inks. And we're going to create, again, another watercolour background. So the kind of backgrounds that I really love to create. And again, just showing you that you can use that kind of medium to create a background and sort of do this heat embossing resist technique. So all I'm doing, this is I think it's the shaded lilac colour. So I'm just squidging this down onto my glass mat, and then I'm just going to spritz it with a little bit of water. And I'm just going to sort of put my paper into the ink, just to sort of let that run over the design. But again, because of that embossing powder, it's going to resist that colour, and it's still going to give us our design. So you can see here I've done it a couple of times, sort of dried it off in between, just to create that nice sort of depth of colour. But again, like I said earlier, heating this up is going to reheat your embossing powder. At one point I did sort of put my finger in a little bit of it, and it did kind of ruin the design in that particular section. So just be really careful. If you can let your projects dry naturally, I would recommend doing that. But you can see here, so you can't necessarily perhaps see the design really clearly, but I wasn't really kind of going for sort of anything bold. So if you were using a particular design like this and you're heat embossing it into white, and doing sort of a background effect like this, you're probably not looking to have sort of that background to be really noticeable. I just wanted to sort of give it just a little bit of a hint. But what I am going to do, as you can see here, is I'm just taking my watercolour brush again, and I'm just picking up some of that colour just to kind of shade in those bottles a little bit. I really love how the bubbles look on this particular background. I think that works really well with what we've got. But again, just another really simple way of using this technique. Like I said about colouring in between these sort of heat embossed images, so this is quite a dense stamp. It's got a lot of sort of shading and design on it. That colour will bead up slightly, but you can still get a really nice effect getting that sort of darker tone in there, just to kind of darken up that image a little bit. So here are the backgrounds we created. So the one at the top was just a practice one that I did, and I followed the same sort of technique as I did with that last one with the bottles and the bubbles, but I used lots of different colours. So again, those mini distress ink pads, smushed them down onto my glass mat, applied some water, and then that colour sort of got into what is quite a busy design. But I really love the way it came out. You've got some of those really nice spots of really dark colour. So I hope that you found this video informative. It was just a quick video, like I said, off the back of a background I created in another video. So again, that's linked up in the corner. I hope it's just giving you a few ideas of what you can do with the stamps and the sort of medium that you do already use, and just some really fun backgrounds that you can create. So thanks very much for watching this video. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future videos. Please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below if you enjoyed it. Thanks very much for watching, and happy crafting.